Hello and welcome to For Flying Out Loud, a podcast that aims to inspire, empower and help all of our listeners to dream bigger. My name is Andrew Neofitu and I'm super happy to welcome you to another inspirational interview. If you enjoy the episodes and want them to keep coming, please consider showing your support and buy me a coffee. You can find a link in the episode description. Many moons ago, in 1992 to be precise, you know you're old when, I learnt to fly. I was just 17 at the time, and the scope of my solo flying adventures took me from Nottingham Tollerton Airport to Chesterfield, near where my parents lived, the journey of approximately 80 kilometres. And trust me, that tested the limits of my navigational ability. It was some years later and with many hundreds of hours of military training before I did anything much more adventurous. This episode of For Flying Out Loud is brought to you by Flight School Wingman expert support to help you pass your airline cadetship, scholarship or flight school selection process. Now, today I'm thrilled to welcome a guest that at just 19 years old flew somewhat further than I did when I first learned how to fly an aircraft. In fact, she flew more than 52,000 kilometres further. And in August 2021, she started on a journey to fly solo around the world in a Shark ultralight aircraft. In January 2022, 155 days later, this was completed. And in doing so, she broke the Guinness World Record for the youngest woman flying solo around the world and also reduced the gender gap of this record by 11 years between the current youngest male, who was 18, and a previous female record holder, who was 30. What an incredible achievement. Zara Rutherford, the pilot of the epic Fly Solo adventure, a very warm welcome to For Flying Out Loud. How are you doing, Zara?
Yeah, good. Thank you so much for having me, Andrew. I'm excited.
Welcome. Joining us from the west coast of the US today, I believe.
That's right. Yeah, California.
Excellent. What a nice place to be. I love California. So listen, Zara, talk to me about how this all started, because everybody that's ever flown an aeroplane has got a starting point. Some people come to it, you know, as you obviously did as a young person, quite young in life, some later in life. But how did it all start for you?
Yeah, I was actually really lucky that my parents were pilots. So my dad was a helicopter pilot in the army and kind of was really, really passionate about flying. And so he kind of instilled that in us, my brother and I, from a pretty young age. And so I just knew that I was going to be a pilot. I was like, this is going to happen. I'm going to make it happen. I'm going to make sure it happens. And I guess I always dreamt of flying around the world. That was always like, oh my God, wouldn't that be like the greatest adventure ever? But I guess, especially as a child, even now, right, as a child and adult, you know that sometimes you dream too big, right? And you shouldn't even really think about it too much because it's just a dream and nothing ever is going to come out of it. And that's kind of the attitude I had towards it. So started training for my pilot's license still at 15 to get
Wow.
my microlight license because in France, I'm from Belgium, so in France it's 15. And then my PPL a few years later after that because I had my microlight license and then I wanted to fly around the world. And I was like, I should probably get my PPL before I fly
Did you
around the
not just
world.
think about just
Um,
flying around locally first? So I see, like, I've got my license, my micro license. Now I'm going to fly around the world. Did it ever enter your head just to go, I'm just going to fly 80 kilometers to Chesterfield and back?
No, I thought, I should go all the way. Why not? Sorry. But yeah, no, why not go just, bigger trip. It was for my cross country PPL actually, so maybe. um,
I
but
think that
but
qualifies.
yeah, yeah, I think so too. Actually, I think what was it? There was a funny thing where arguably it doesn't qualify. Um,
That's
anyway,
that's one of those
anyway.
weird sort of civilian aviation authority rules where it says a qualifying cross-country flight can only be between two certain points of latitude and longitude, but going around the world wasn't qualify.
Right,
Which,
it was something like that.
yeah, something ridiculous. Yeah, but here's the thing.
Yeah.
So, although your dad was in the army, so a helicopter pilot in the army, um, still, as a young woman in particular, I've chatted to lots of female pilots on the podcast. Been really lucky to sort of learn more about it because, as a guy, it's like lots of little boys want to get into flying, but that's not always the case. I certainly learned for young women getting into flying. So. Um, Even though you had your dad, who was obviously a pilot, and you just touched on some bit before there, you were saying that not everyone says you can do these things. How did that sort of resonate with you then when you were a young woman? Did you feel that actually I shouldn't even be getting into this in the first place?
Yeah, a little bit, a little bit. I think especially I grew up like until I was 14 in Belgium, so for me it was very like it was just very obvious that women didn't fly, kind of. I know that sounds weird because obviously women do fly, but it wasn't like the thing that women would do, right?
Yeah,
And so it definitely feels weird when when you really want to become like a pilot, for example, and you're just aware that that's not really the thing that you should be doing in a weird like social expectations kind
yeah,
of way. Um, so, and especially I think, as an adult, I'm now much more comfortable to be like, oh, I don't care.
yeah,
Um, but as a teenager, or just at 13, even 12, that that really weighs on you. So I'm really glad that I ignored that, and that I just decided to go for it anyway. But it was definitely kind of, I never obviously had anybody really say anything directly like towards me to say like you shouldn't be doing this.
right.
It was just kind of like a
That feeling.
almost subconscious, yeah, like feeling that like I just wasn't really meant to be there. Just you're at a flight school, you look around you, there's no female flight instructors,
Mm.
there's maybe one other woman flying, but other than that, like you're just surrounded by guys, and they were all amazing. But just you just knew that it wasn't, you were kind of standing out in that
Yeah,
sense.
you're not sort of part of that clan, I guess. And it's weird, isn't it? Because the sort of thing that gets suggested. I mean, we've had it with President Obama, and they go, "Well, we've had a black president, therefore there's no problem. There's no problem for black people
Mm,
moving in senior position. We've got a female captain, therefore there's no problem with women." And there isn't a problem as
right.
such, but it's that perception that yeah, I'm seeing what am I seeing around here? Well, I'm not seeing lots of other people that look like me that are like me. So I can appreciate that, particularly as a young person. As you say, you're older now, and
Mm,
it doesn't bother you as much. But when you're very young, I can definitely see how that would affect you. In fact, I was chatting in fact, when I first started the podcast with former female pilots who were training in the US, actually over in Phoenix, and we were chatting through some stats. And I know the stats are improving really slowly, but for example, in the commercial world that I fly in, I think up to about 10% now of pilots
mm,
might be female pilots worldwide commercially. Still only about
yeah.
1% of captains, which is really crazy if you think about it. So, yeah, the stats are slowly improving, but yeah, well, you're certainly doing something, Sarah, to inspire young women into aviation careers. And in fact, we're going to talk a little bit more about that later and what your latest endeavours are. So, apart from just thinking, I want to fly around the world, was there any other sort of conscious thought into, I'm going to complete this world record attempt? How did it sort of come about?
Yeah, so I got my pilot's license. I was really enjoying it. I was actually doing some local flying around around my town. And I think at that point, I still was like it was in the back of my mind, kind of like, oh, wouldn't it be cool if, one day I had the money, right? Like maybe when I'm 60 and old and hopefully, retired and have some money saved up, I can go do this. But but then also I don't really like that mentality because if you keep pushing something off, then it's never going to
Yeah.
happen. So so I was like, okay, you know what? What I'm gonna do is I'm going to take this was near the end of my like secondary schooling. So I was like 17, 18. I was like, you know what? I'm gonna take a year out of school, like between school and university, take a gap year essentially. Uh, and then like a pretty crazy gap year, but I'm gonna take a
Yes,
gap
yeah,
year and then
exactly.
see if I can fly around the world. That's exactly what happened. So I think I told my parents. My my dad was really excited. My mum a bit less so. Um, just from like a what do you mean kind of perspective. A bit concerned for my safety, but yeah, and that's kind of how it all got started. Like telling the parents first, and then from that point on, it was like, okay, what do I actually need, right? Like sponsorship. I had needed funding. I needed a plane, needed a route, and so that is how everything kind of
I,
started. And it felt it even at the time when I decided to go for it, I was like, it's not going to happen. But it did.
But you made it happen. I can see lots of parents now at home who've got young people that want to get into flying that like this. So they're putting their fingers in their ears, going la la la. La. Don't get any ideas going
Yeah.
flying around the world. It's going to be horrendously expensive. Can't you just go on a train around Europe or something like that instead?
Right.
I
Yeah.
just want to read out some of the stats about this journey, Zara, because it's just
Mhm.
as I said, my first solo was about 80 kilometers. So if it's okay with you, I'm just going to run through these
Mhm.
stats just to show how impressive this was. So the total distance, 52,080 kilometres. Do correct me if I've got this wrong. If it's like half a kilometre out or something, Zara, please let me know. Total time in the air, 200 hours. That one surprised me because I thought it'd be a lot more time in the air than that to fly around the world. But 200 hours.
It was about 240, 250 in the
250
end.
hours.
Yeah.
Yeah, but even so, I
Yeah, but
think
still, yeah.
he's flying in a, I fly 787s around and I'm sort of sat there for 15 hours. And I suppose I do go quite a long way in 15 hours, but it still doesn't seem like a lot of hours to fly around the world, but a long way. 71
Yeah.
takeoffs and landings with 69 stops, including 10 diversions to an airfield other than planned and 2 returns to the same airfield. Your longest flight, which this is mind-blowing, 2,000 kilometers. That's really impressive. Longest flight over water, a very scary 1,861 kilometers. I'm almost there. Highest altitude, 13,800 feet over Greenland. I know that because I've looked down at the safety altitude. So you must have been pretty close to some of those mountains. We'll chat about that in a bit. And 31 countries visited. So honestly, I mean, I can't really get my head around somebody doing that in any aeroplane solo, never mind at your age as you were. And how much flying did you actually have before you even started that journey? How many sort of hours?
I didn't have that many hours, probably not enough to do this, but I was lucky to have very practical hours. So what that means is that like I'd fly a lot with my dad. My dad is a ferry pilot.
Right.
So we would be doing some pretty unique flying of like flying single engine aircraft for clients across the Atlantic. But I couldn't log any of those. So
Right.
I did a few of those before my trip. But anyway, logged, I had just over 100, which
Wow.
is a low number, but I felt pretty good. I'd had some pretty like good like quality like, sort of practical experience, and it wasn't like 100 hours of doing circuits around my local airfield.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah, that's still incredible. I mean, because the first time you ever go sailing in an aeroplane, it's pretty mind blowing, isn't it? And then you go, wow, I've just gone sailing in an aeroplane. How did that happen? I can still remember that,
Yeah.
even from like 16 years old, I still remember it. But yeah, even if you've done something like that with somebody else, to go and do that on your own at that age, and it's not like I'm just going to fly over here and everything's going to go according to plan. And we're going to chat about some of the things that happen. But yeah, anything could happen. And you are on your own, and
Yeah.
you'll have been there. I know probably quite a lot of pilots who've never been on their own when something
Mm.
really insane has happened, or some decision making process has to happen that no one's there to help you with it. And a lot of people are pretty scared by that. And, it is a scary thing, isn't it? Never mind flying 1,800 kilometers over the sea. So,
Yeah.
but you did it in a pretty cool aeroplane as well, the Shark aircraft. I think it's that a Czechoslovakian aeroplane.
It is, yeah, it is, and that's really why. I mean, it was like a lot less hours than it could have been. It was cruising at 150 knots, so that's
Wow.
like around 270 kilometers an hour. Um, so it was really quick, and then its endurance was also really quite amazing. It would fly, yeah, it flew me across like it was an 8 hour leg, that one 1,600 kilometer one.
Wow.
Actually I think it was a bit longer. I think it was a bit longer. Anyway, but it was from Mumbai to Dubai and that was 8 hours. And that was a lot very long 8 hours over water. Quite boring. But but yeah, and then even then I still had like a few hours like a couple hours of endurance. So
Did it
that
have an
was fine.
autopilot just to take the pressure off you flying for a period of
It
time?
did, thankfully it did,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah,
So that
great.
made things a lot easier to deal with.
But it must have been pretty heavy. If you said from Mumbai to Dubai, it was one of the legs that you just mentioned.
That's
So
right.
obviously in Mumbai, pretty hot most of the year, really, and you're heavy. So for listeners out there, don't understand what this all means. We're talking about density, altitude, aren't we, and things like that. If it gets hotter or it's higher, then the engine doesn't work as well and the wing doesn't work as well. So how heavy was the
That's
aeroplane?
right.
Did that give you many problems taking off from Mumbai? With for a flight of 8 hours, you must have been pretty heavy with fuel.
Yeah, great question. I was actually very lucky. The plane itself is actually super light, and its engine is pretty powerful compared to its size. I was, just under 500 kilos, on takeoff from Mumbai. So
Wow.
that was, yeah. So and it took off fine. I never struggled taking off. It was, yeah. The plane was super easy. The one time I struggled gaining altitude was in Greenland. Was at that 13,000 feet. Just because, yeah, at that point the air is so thin
Yeah.
that the plane can't really get up there anymore. Um, so yeah, but the heat was okay. The heat was manageable, um, because the plane is so small
Mhm.
to try to get more speed out of it. The place where the engine is stored, so like underneath the canopy, right at the front, is really really tight, which means that there isn't much air circulation in there.
Right.
So I would struggle a lot in. Actually, Saudi Arabia and Dubai were surprisingly cold at that time of year, but near the equator, places like Colombia, Indonesia, where it's
Uh,
humid and warm, um, I would have to make sure I was, whenever I turned the engine on, I had to be in the air within like 10 minutes or the engine would overheat.
right.
So so that makes it quite difficult when you're at a gigantic international airport and you try to convince the ground controller that you need to take off like ASAP. But it worked out. I thankfully I yeah, I didn't overheat it on my trip. I did later on, when I was back in Frankfurt of all places, but that was a separate thing.
I just sort of it's just weird to hear you chatting about it because again, as a long haul pilot, yeah, Colombia, South America, you'd expect that. But I'm now hearing a young woman who's taken an ultralight aircraft to Colombia, Indonesia, Mumbai,
Yeah.
Greenland. Honestly, Zara, it's mind blowing. I'm really, really, absolutely blown away by it all. So have you got problems, things like overheating the engine and like, what sort of engineering support did you have? Because aircraft, I fly
Mm,
GA sort of aircraft as well. They need maintenance. So how did you go about
of
getting
course.
that sort of support?
Yeah, so it was a Rotax engine. So the engine itself, there's plenty of help from like everywhere. And so yeah, very popular engine. And then the actual plane, so even though it's a small manufacturer, it's quite similar kind of to the Diamond aircraft, which is a huge also
Yep.
like manufacturer from around the world. And so a lot of I mean, I'd find like Diamond manufacturers whenever I needed to help out with small things, and then otherwise, Shark themselves would organize like someone to come help out if that was needed.
Yeah.
Thankfully, the plane did really, really good. In all aspects, I never had any issues with it. It was super reliable, which is really nice. The one thing I discovered in Greenland was that in extremely cold temperatures, like I mean, extremely cold, from about -5 degrees onwards, the canopy sensor warning that would tell me if my canopy door was open
Ah,
would malfunction and say that it was open. Um, so I'd be in Greenland in the one of the most hostile environments in the world, and then my plane had this bright, glaring red warning light going off. Um, but but other than that, the plane did really good.
I had a similar thing in an old glider of mine. It was an electric motor in the front, but again on the canopy to stop the motor running with the canopy open, it had exactly the same sort of thing. So it would then stop the motor
Oh,
running
I
because it would
see.
say, "Well, we think the canopy's open." Well, the canopy's not open. But it's amazing how compelling those warning messages can be, isn't it? Whereas something like check your landing
Yeah,
gear, check your landing gear. I'm like landing gear's down, but it's going to check your landing gear. And go, is it a warning?
yeah,
The gear's down. I can see the lever's down, but the landing gear
yeah,
very compelling.
yeah, yeah.
How much flying was done during the day, Zara, and how much sort of by night time?
Yeah, great question. So I would fly on average between 5 and 6 hours, like 5, 6 hours a day. Longest flight was at 8, 8.5.
Wow.
Shortest was, maybe 20 minutes, if I had an issue and I turned around or
Yeah.
something. But I didn't fly at night, and that was really important for me. So I was flying VFR only, which means like in visual
Mhm.
conditions. And so at night, well, I could technically, I guess, legally fly at night in the US, but in Europe, because my airplane is European, I wasn't allowed to fly. No, it was VFR day only, basically, um, which meant that I had to stay out of cloud and only fly during the day.
Wow. And that in itself is really challenging because, as any pilot will tell you, the weather is unpredictable. And I'm guessing you came up against some conditions where the weather was changing quickly. And then how do you stay VFR? Because it's not a matter of well, it's getting a bit cloudy, so I'll just go a bit lower because there might be mountains around or buildings around and all that sort of
Right?
stuff.
Yeah.
So do you have any sort of heart in mouth moments regarding the weather on the trip?
Yeah, totally. Totally. Thankfully, So I was mostly afraid about cloud in the north part of the world,
Hmm.
where the temperatures were freezing, which means that if I were to need to fly into cloud, um, I'd, the icing that would form from those below freezing conditions and the moisture in the cloud would actually become really dangerous really quickly because the plane is so small
Yeah.
and the engine is small. Like there's really no margin of safety there. So, and that's what the manufacturer kind of tested out themselves, and they were like, yeah, don't ever fly this into icing conditions.
Right.
So that's what I was most nervous about, was that, I'd end up in Siberia where there are no like alternate airports. There's nothing else, and then you have to fly through cloud. But thankfully, I waited a month in Alaska and a month in Siberia to make sure that that wouldn't
Wow.
happen. So there was a lot of patience. I did struggle a lot with the weather near the equator because of the intertropical convergence zone,
Absolutely.
where it was just thunderstorms all the time. And they would like just pop up with like within 4 hours, right? So my flights of 6 hours, I'd leave, everything would look amazing, and then by the time, I'd flown a bit, turns out it wasn't. So that was a pain. Flying near the equator was really tricky. I really struggled around like Singapore, just being squeezed in between two thunderstorms, and because it was so hazy, I was struggling to actually see what was going on. And I was over water, so in that sense, I was fine because I was like, okay, I can go really, really low if I need to. I can go to 100 feet. I probably wouldn't go much lower if I could go to 100 feet, right? And and yeah, so I struggle also like mentally with that because it was like, oh, I can't. There's no prep I can do at this point. At this point, it's kind of luck based.
And my chest is feeling anxious listening to this. I mean, you expect it in some forms of flying. If I cast my mind back to military flying, you expect to fly down at 100 feet. You brief, as you say, you're briefing
Mm,
for it, you're prepping for it. You not 100 hours like of time you'd logged. I'd had hundreds and hundreds of hours by the stage. You expect to do it, but I mean, I've flown into Singapore, and I remember saying to the captain at about 500 feet, we need to go around because the rain had become so heavy that I couldn't distinguish where the threshold was of the runway and where anything else
yeah.
was. So we went around, but that's an big aeroplane. But doing it in a light aircraft is absolutely. How do you get yourself in that sort of mindset, then, Zara? Because you're a young person, you're doing this sort of amazing adventure, but really scary, I'd imagine at times. And I'm sure you were scared. If any pilot ever says they weren't scared, they probably,
Mm.
probably shouldn't be flying an aeroplane, should they? But how do you get yourself in that sort of mindset to overcome those sorts of challenges?
Yeah. So for me, it really was like just removing all the risk that I had control over. So everything that I could, like all the weather forecasts that I could check, I talked to local pilots wherever I was to see, what their opinion was on the route or the weather, make sure the plane was okay, make sure I was okay. And then I would just have to accept that to a certain extent, like there was luck involved, and I just had to be lucky. And that was probably the most difficult thing actually mentally. That was really rough, especially for the really long flights. I had one really really long flight from um, Anadyr to Magadan, which is two places in Siberia, from the very north of Siberia, kind of near like the US, to further south. And it was going to be 7 hours, and in between in that 7 hours, there was not one single alternate airport.
Wow.
So it was almost 2,000 kilometers, not one other airport. And at the time, it was minus 35 degrees Celsius on the ground. So I was like, okay, well, if anything were to happen, I'd be stuck in the middle of nowhere, minus 35 degrees Celsius. That's not really a place I want to be. But so yeah, so then I was like, okay, so I just need to wait for a really nice weather, blue weather day. Again, because with cloud, like I was just thankfully it was so cold that arguably at that point there's like a physics thing where
Yeah.
the icing isn't necessarily as bad, but but more plainly the engine hadn't been tested in minus 35 degrees Celsius. So it's great if there's no icing, but if the engine can't keep up, then that's great. Um, but yeah, so at that point, I found like a nice, great day with it that had an inversion. So what that means is normally as you go up, it gets colder, But an inversion is when the opposite happens. When as you go up, it actually gets a bit warmer. And I found this sweet spot at about 5,000 feet. And after that, it got colder again. But at 5,000 feet, it was a nice, warm minus 20 degrees. And that was perfect. The engine was just in the yellow, and I just cruised along. It was 7 hours of no clouds, and that was one of those flights where I was like, okay, I have to be lucky today,
Wow.
that it doesn't get too cold and the weather doesn't act up.
And just trying to visualize this now. So you're taking off from somewhere in Siberia. You've got this 2,000 kilometer, did you say, leg or something like that? So anyway,
Yeah,
big, there's no
yeah,
divs within 2,000 K. So what do? You sort of phone your mum up and say, hey, so mum, yeah, I'm about to set off on this leg. And presumably it's not a big airport you're at. It's not like a hustling, bustling, Heathrow Airport or something.
no,
Um,
no.
so you're walking out to this aircraft on your own, all fueled up, ready to go. And is there anyone there to say, pat you on the back and say, good luck, Zara? Or do you sort of step into the airplane and off you go?
Yeah, so actually the Russians are really nice. So they would wish me luck, but no, I mean people were so helpful. So I remember that flight specifically. When I got to the plane in the morning, it had been left out overnight, just because there was no hangar space, and so there'd been like a nice like centimeter of ice accumulating during the night on the wings, and the wings have to be smooth, right, to fly it properly. And so I spent an hour with some of the Russian guys who were really nice, really helpful. Spent about an hour using this sort of maybe huge hot air tube
Right.
that like release hot air that we could normally is meant to warm up the engine, but what I would use it for was to actually melt the ice off of the wing and then remove the ice off. Because it was so cold, we would spend maybe a minute on the spot on the wing, wait for it to melt, wipe it off, move on to the next part of the wing. And like it was insane. As soon as you would move on to the next part of the wing, that first part, the drops would refreeze instantly.
Wow.
Um, so we had to go around like 2 or 3 times. But no, it was, yeah, I mean my mom knew that like it was a big day, my dad as well. I had satellite communications, satellite tracking. The Russians wanted me to update my position every half an hour, so I would actually
Right.
be on the phone in the plane, like hi, I'm okay. Um, but yeah, so
Long flights. Yeah, my mum used to ask me to phone her when I'd landed back on the aircraft carrier to let her know I'd landed safely. And I was like, Mum, this is not a simple process. I've got to phone up the ship communications office. They've then got to patch it through to somewhere in Whitehall. And then Whitehall have got to patch it through to you and then back to me. And it's going to cost me about £5 a minute just to say I've landed safely. So listen, some other cool stories I want you to tell me about, because you'd mentioned these briefly ahead of this podcast. Some of the things you'd seen. What were some of the sort of animals that you saw on this journey, and some other
that's
amazing things
right.
that you'd seen? Tell us about those.
Yeah, so I saw some really incredible things. I saw a whale in Greenland, as well as seals, like seals sleeping on the ice. That was
Wow.
insane. That was really beautiful. I was flying pretty low, and
Could you see the whiskers?
and not that low. Sorry. Maybe next time. But yeah, so I was flying pretty low, and then I could see like what looked like kind of like it sounds mean, but what looked like kind of trash bags on the ice. It was like it was kind of round brown things, and quite like very like large. So I was like, I have no idea what that is. And then once I spotted one, I noticed that they were actually everywhere. And so I realized that there were these brown bags on all of the icebergs, and then the lower I got, I was like, oh, there's heads, like there's heads to the bags, and so I could see like the flippers and stuff like that. And they're really cute. They're really really cute. So they would look up as well, but they're really like
If there are
yeah,
any seals
really
listening to this podcast episode, I hope Zara hasn't
yeah.
offended you there by saying you look like a trash bag.
No,
And
no,
whales,
I don't mean to offend the seal community, but
and whales you
yeah.
mentioned as well. What kind of whales did you see?
Oh, I should totally know what kind of whale. I'm afraid actually I'm not very familiar with my. I think it was a blue. No, not blue whale. Oh, I'm
A
sorry, I
big one.
forgot. But it was a big one, a big whale. Yeah.
And
They're hard to
camels
they're
as
hard
well in
to
Saudi
to
Arabia or
see.
something like that. So we're going from whales and seals
That's
to
right.
camels. Yeah.
Yeah, that's right.
So
Saudi Arabia was really cool. Yeah, just they actually have farms of camels. So they I think it's they drink camel milk,
right.
and so I would just be flying along, and there'd be like a herd of 100 camels just
Wow.
kind of pop up out of nowhere.
I've ridden a camel.
Yeah.
They're actually people. They're very nice creatures. They spit at you, I think, but if you annoy them. But I think they're incredible animals. I don't know if you've ever been on the back of one, but they're really big. And yeah,
Nice.
I've been on a
Next time, I'll do another diversion for that one.
yeah.
Yeah.
Talk to me about some of these diversions then. What cause these sort of heart and mouth moments? What would be your sort of if we could pick the sort of top two or the top three heart and mouth moments? What would they be?
Yeah. Yeah. Great question. I think I diverted a lot just because like weather was usually a bit of a pain. But the biggest one for me was probably in Russia. I had one pretty long flight where I was following the coast of Russia, like south to. I was desperate to get to warmer weather because I'd been in the snow at that point for a couple of months, and it was just really cold. And it was December or like the very end of November, and and I'm flying along, and I'm heading to a pretty big Russian city, but I'm following the coast, and I'm realizing that I'm just not gonna make it. Like it pretty quickly, a lot of cloud develops, and I'm trying to get underneath it, but also I'm aware that I have to get to that city. I have to go back into land, so I can't. It's really nice flying over water because you can get really really low if you need to,
Yeah.
because you're not gonna hit
Yeah, of
anything.
course.
But it's a very different approach when you have to start flying onto into land, especially land you're not familiar with. And it was mountains, so at that point it was like, okay, it's I can't be at 1,000, 500, 1,000 feet about to go into mountains because yeah, it's a bad idea. But um, so then I decided to divert, and I found this tiny town called Ayan, about 800 people that live there. And I landed on this pretty short gravel, like really rough gravel strip, um, which was actually really cool. But then it was tiny. It was like on the coast. To give you an idea of how remote it was, the town is only accessible by air.
Right.
There are no roads that go into or out of that town. And in the winter, the ocean freezes, so the boats can't get there either. So, so yeah, so just super, super remote. I was there for all 3 weeks. Nobody really spoke English, no Wi-Fi. Just really in the middle of nowhere.
Wow.
Um, yeah,
Wow. Incredible. What would be
yeah.
your next most heart and mouth moment, would you say?
Oh, the scariest moment. I was quite lucky in that I never had a truly terrifying moment. I think I had, let's see, I'm trying to think of a
I
good
think you
story.
mentioned thunderstorms in Asia, and I was
Yeah,
referencing that earlier. Any of those? Because I mean, thunderstorms. It's
right.
just the immense power of those things, isn't it? You look at them, and it's hard to explain to somebody how much energy is in a thunderstorm. But it'd be like
It's
enough to power a
crazy.
city,
Yeah,
for several weeks, wouldn't it? That energy in
yeah,
one storm. So yeah, any
yeah.
sort of scary moments around those things?
A little bit, yeah. It was again. I was very quick to divert, which I'm glad I was doing. But obviously, it meant that sometimes I was waiting around a lot more than I could have been. But as soon as I wasn't entirely convinced I could get to my destination and that I was going to be cutting off another safe like out,
Yeah,
I would be like, okay, I'm diverting. So I would try my absolute best to get around these thunderstorms if I knew that I could, not squeeze myself in a position that was bad. But as soon as I was like, okay, this is not going to work out, I would divert. So in Singapore, that was pretty tight, kind of squeezing in between two thunderstorms. At that point, I was like 100 feet over the water,
oh my goodness.
um, just trying to kind of see like what was going on, um, and then it wasn't in like it was funny. It wasn't in the thunderstorm, thankfully, but it was like, okay, can I get through him? And just trying to figure out like I felt like safe. It was just like, okay, what if I went this way? Okay, and then I turn here a little bit and there a little bit. Okay, I can see land over there. Okay, great. Like let's figure this out. Can I go to can I go there and then reassess? Um, that's kind of how things would work usually.
It's
And I had
amazing.
another big thing that I kind of had to deal with was a super typhoon in the Philippines, which was kind of crazy. So that was Typhoon Rai, and Typhoon Rai was this huge storm that I had to completely circumvent. So, but thankfully, again, I never got too close to it. But
Wow.
yeah.
Okay. This is sounding absolutely nails. How did you put yourself in a headspace to stay calm? Because I can't honestly, hand on heart, say that I stay calm. Sometimes I'm shouting in the, in the cockpit, if I, not when in the
Right.
day job, but when I'm flying gliders, I've been around big thunderstorms or I've got no
In the
engine.
gliders,
Yeah, and I'm
wow.
trying to climb away from a
Okay,
field,
yeah.
500, nothing compared to what you've done, so I might add. But in the cockpit, I'm like, what is going on? Why is this happening? How-
Right, right, yeah.
and of course, that's not helping at all, is it? So,
Yeah.
how did you manage to have that sort of calmness in the cockpit just to navigate this and still have your
Yeah.
options open, which you did?
Yeah, no, great question. So, I think let's see, I would sing. I would sing because I mean, shouting shouting helps when there's somebody to shout at, I
Yeah.
think. But because I was so low, I was like, "Oh, this is all on me. I can shout at myself maybe." Um, so I kind of like, pinch myself and be like, "Okay, get yourself out of here." Couple like yeah, just plane was acting up. I think in New Mexico. I took off and realized after I take it off that my pitot tube was blocked, and it's a really important instrument that tells you how fast you're going. And and I discovered this after I was in the air, that my plane was saying that I wasn't moving, right? My speed was zero,
Oh my goodness.
and which would be okay, but then because you can tell you're flying, right? So
Yeah.
ultimately you'd be okay. But what that meant was that my landing gear had, to get the wheels back up, I had like a software safety mechanism that wouldn't allow me to put the wheels in if the plane thought that it wasn't moving,
Yeah, because
right?
otherwise
Because
you
if
could
you
put them
try
up on
to
the
get
ground. Yeah.
exactly, yeah, exactly, and you would damage the plane.
Yeah.
So that totally made sense. But what that meant was that I can get the wheels in. Also would be okay, but this was summer in New Mexico in the desert, and I was already at like a few thousand feet up at this point, like 8 or 9 thousand feet, which means the air is pretty thin, and I was struggling to gain altitude at that point. So I was trying to get up nice and high to fly to my next airport, and so I'm flying along, and at one point the the speed like the speed shoots up to way faster than I was going. Like I was still in a climb, and the plane was saying I was going like 300 kilometers an hour, like 400 kilometers an hour, and I was like, okay, probably not, but that's fine. I was like, great, I can get my landing gear in. So that's what I do. I get my landing gear in, and I'm heading to the next airport. And as I'm preparing to land, my speed is still really, really high, and at that point I realized that there's an opposite
You
safety
can't put the wheels
feature
down
where
now.
you can't put the wheels down when
Right.
the plane thinks it's going too fast. And so then I was like, oh, like why did I do this? Like this I shouldn't have done that moment. But then yeah, emergency safety release with the gears so that the wheels kind of clunked down and released like that, and that was fine.
Wow, amazing. I mean, all pilots that have been through flying training will know that you can fly a certain power setting, a certain attitude, nose up or nose down for those that aren't sort of pilots. And if you have that power and you have that particular attitude, you'll be flying at about a certain speed. So I'm guessing that's what you did. And it
Right.
sounds really easy in practice, doesn't it? But in that moment, when you're so used to seeing the speed increase or the speed decrease in a certain way,
Mm,
and then all of a sudden it's showing something that's completely bizarre, even though you know it's wrong, it's really compelling. And
right,
and to
yeah.
fly those pitch and power settings, I mean, again, Zara, your experience and your ability just to retain that calm head and think through those eventualities, what is happening, actually diagnose the situation properly, understand what all the information means, and then process it. That's at a level which I know that very, very experienced pilots have been flying for many, many, many years with thousands and thousands of hours often aren't able to do that under that sort of pressure. So I take my hat off to you to come up with that sort of decision making process. It's amazing. Before we move on to other questions and what's coming next, I want to draw everyone's attention to this fantastic new book, which literally arrived in the post. I'm going to hold this up to the screen here. It says, I Flew Around the World, and that's due for release, if I'm right, Zara, on the 7th of November. Is that right?
17th.
17th
Yeah,
of November. My
17th.
apologies. Really, really nice book. And I mean, I love all the graphic. All of this is just so nice. And what age group is this book aimed at, Zara?
Around 8 years old. So young kids, just around 10, like really anybody who's interested in learning about my trip. It tells some of my stories, like the typhoon that I dealt with, earthquake in Mexico, stuff like that. And also I think for me, I really like understanding how things work, which is why I think flying kind of intrigued me in the first place. And so it kind of also delves into, how planes fly and stuff like that.
It really
So
does. There was
so
there
yeah,
was a section at the back here, and I'm going to quickly try and find the page, but it was exactly how an aircraft works, lift and drag, and all of those sort of
yeah,
performance things. And what you've been
that's
able to
right.
do with this is, you talk about the equator there and the ITCZ. I can see that sort of area there. Um,
Yeah, yeah.
what this book does, genuinely, it's really hard to train people. I've had instructors in the past, most of which have been very, very good, by the way. But sometimes people don't have a way of explaining a concept to somebody in a way that they can understand. And of course, you have to adapt that to each different type of person. But what you've been able to do in the book there is really break that down. And actually, for people much older than 8 years old, it's explaining things in a way that makes everything make sense. So, what was the idea behind
Oh, thank you.
writing the book, Zara?
So it was a similar thing for me where like because when I grew up I didn't see many women flying. I didn't have many female role models. I mean people, would talk about Amelia Earhart,
Yeah,
but she hasn't been around for a very long time. So as a young
absolutely.
girl that was maybe not the most relatable person. But it was really just kind of to have to show like, hey, look, there's women flying essentially, and there's also separately, it was also very much like, it sounds really cheesy, but the sky is not the limit, right?
100%.
I was so convinced that my dream was only a dream that I never tried to make it a reality just because of that. Just because of that mindset that it wasn't going to work out and it was a ridiculous thing to think about and I would just dream about it. And really the first step to overcoming that, which is to flying around the world, was saying, no, I'll try and see what happens. So that's a key thing really for anything in life, is to just say, and also stop putting. A lot of people. I've met a lot of people trying to beat, my record, which is great. So I'll try to help them out and give them advice. But a lot of them end up saying, "Oh well, now isn't really the right moment. Like maybe once I finish school or when I graduate
Yeah,
university." Or and and the truth is that um, it's very tempting. Like I wanted to do the same, right? To say, oh, I'll worry about it later. But it's really important to be like, no, I will do this now.
yeah,
Um,
100%.
yeah.
I mean, one thing I know now, because I'm, believe it or not, I'm turning 50 years old next year. I've no idea how that happened. It makes me want to be sick because last week, I was 17 doing my private pilot's license. So I don't know how that happened.
Right.
But
Yeah.
life goes by so quickly. And actually, what's the worst that happens? You fail at something, right? So I'll fail at that
Right. Yeah.
and I'll figure something else out and I'll move forward. But if you place limitations on yourself, it's just never going to happen, is it? Whereas if you at least have a go, then it's going to happen. And I guess, this is a fantastic positive message to lots of young people, young women who perhaps don't have that visibility, that is still the case. It's improving, but it's still the case. Other young people, perhaps as well, that also don't have that visibility of things like aviation careers.
Mm,
I've flown with very few people of colour, for example, so
mm.
all of that diversity that we don't see, because most of it is blokes like me flying aeroplanes, unfortunately. But slowly it's changing. I think it's a fantastic book, Zara. Where can people learn more about the book? Where can they buy it? Are there audio books and things like that as well?
Yeah, totally. Yes. So it's available on really any major retailer. So Amazon, your local bookstore, hopefully, or just a like your like large bookstore. Um, but yeah. So please like check it out. The illustrations are amazing. Yeah, I love how the drawings, like, they really the every illustration is based off of pictures that I sent through.
Oh, really?
And
Amazing.
so,
Oh,
yeah, and so it's really like, um, I looked at them and I was like, yes,
this
this
is
is
you
what they
here.
felt like, what this is
This
gonna
is
look like.
Zara in her. I'm
That's right.
imagining that's your immersion seat for flying across the sea.
It is.
Yeah,
Exactly. Yes,
excellent.
it
And all
is.
of that explanation there, which is fantastic. You're looking quite happy there, Zara, even though you're about to go and fly over the sea, aren't
Yes, I apparently so.
and picture the aircraft as well. It's a really really cool aeroplane. So yeah,
Yeah.
fantastic. So I will put a link in the episode description of both the video and the podcast audio. So go and check that link out, guys. And I Flew Around the World by Zara Rutherford is what you're looking for.
Mhm.
So as we said right at the beginning today, you're over on the West Coast. You're at university at the moment. So what's happening now? Are you doing any flying? You know, what's next? That might be a little bit exciting. What's coming?
Yeah, so right now life has taken a slightly more no, maybe, yeah, structured like way, where I'm studying electrical engineering. So it's a lot of work, a lot of just, homework, stuff like that. But I'm still flying whenever I can. So I did another transatlantic, which was amazing, just a couple of months ago. I do that kind of as for work now, whenever like a part-time job, which is quite a nice part-time job, I recommend. But so yeah, so whenever I can, I'll try to fly across. And unfortunately, I don't have much more time to fly. But that's okay because I get to build cool stuff at university now and just kind of focus on yeah, building stuff.
And interestingly, you know, so starting off, obviously you're passionate about flying, but more like it sounds to me like more about the endeavor than the actual flying aeroplanes. That's what it seems like to me. I might have that wrong, Zara, so correct me if I'm wrong. But you're not really interested in going to a professional flying career, well, not of sorts anyway. What sort of other flying would you like to do? Because we've chatted about
Yeah,
it. So where is your next cross country? More than country,
yeah,
likely to
yeah,
take you in an ideal world. What's going to happen next?
yeah. I do. I love flying. I do love flying. I love other things as well. So that's why like I'm trying to find a world where I can do everything, I guess. But my favorite type of flying is flying low and slow. Just so you really get to like see everything, except over water. Water's the one where you want to go fast.
Yeah.
But every time I get to have an excuse to go to Greenland, I go. There's nothing like it. As you approach Greenland, before you even really see the coast, you will just see like the icebergs
Yeah.
starting to form, and they're huge. I mean, they're gigantic, right? Like almost mountain size. Well, not quite, but I'm exaggerating, but really big icebergs. And then when you actually reach Greenland, it's just one of the most incredible sights. Like it
Yeah.
is like these mountains that go up. You said you've flown there, right?
I've
You
flown
flew
over
there.
it, and every time, of
Oh,
course, I'm viewing it from 40 odd thousand feet usually, but looking down, and they certainly do look big. Those icebergs. If I can see something that's got vertical definition from 7 miles away, roughly, it's definitely big. I would love to visit Greenland, and I just imagine the peace of it and hearing the sort of ice
yeah,
move. But you see those glaciers flowing down, don't you? They're going literally hundreds of kilometers. These glaciers, and at the end of them are these huge icebergs, like you say. It's just an incredible part of the world. Probably some of my most favorite views, just like you're saying, Zoe, but you've got to see it a lot closer than I ever have.
yeah. No, but from any altitude, it's just amazing. But yeah, just flying into Greenland, you're just greeted with like these incredible mountains, and because it's quite violent in a way.
Yeah.
The There is no coast at all, so it just goes straight from ice and icebergs and ocean to like very very steep mountains.
Yeah.
And the approach into one of the airports, like to land at one of the airports, you have to then follow this fjord down, in between the mountains to reach it, and then you're surrounded by glaciers
Was
just
that
before that. It's
Kangalussuaq
just
you're talking about there?
insane.
Which airfield was that?
No, Sasawak
Narsarsuaq,
actually,
right?
but
Yeah, yeah,
yeah,
okay.
but still just really cool. Yeah,
Yeah, amazing.
yeah,
Wow.
that's a bucket list item. Kind of.
It's not
I haven't
somewhere I
done
want
it
to take a
yet.
big jet. If I'm honest with you, I've looked down
Okay.
and I've looked at the charts and I've gone, yeah, that looks like it'd be a bad day if I had to go into North Sassuag. But there aren't many other places to land if you're going that part of the world. So, talking
No,
about
yeah.
this sort of scenery, which is sort of out of this world scenery, you're an electrical engineer. You've done this amazing trip. My other sort of flying buddies, one of them was a test part in F-35, and he was just like you, very bright person, way beyond anything that I could ever be capable of. And he was looking at, well, I think he was invited or was having discussions about with NASA about astronaut type stuff. And so, what are you thinking,
Cool.
Zoe? That's got to be on the it's got to be on the horizon, surely.
That's right. Yeah, that's the dream. That's the dream is to be an astronaut. I really like the idea of making your contribution to kind of humanity that way, and then
Yeah.
at the same time, incredible experience, really meaningful work. So, so that's the dream. So, yeah, pursuing my bachelor's degree right now, and then after that, it'd be a master's, and then hopefully someone someone will take me.
Wow.
But
Oh, I mean, well, you're hitting it perfectly, aren't you, with the timing? With, I mean, I'm blown away by watching these anything sort of space related. But then I remember watching that first Falcon Heavy from SpaceX going up, and now just the last week that thing being caught by those two arms. There's probably a technical description of that. I'm not very that.
incredible.
Yeah,
Yeah,
incredible. I'd be a terrible astronaut.
yeah.
So, but it looks, but of course,
Yeah.
it really is. And the next mission, of course, is going to be sending people back to the moon and then send people to Mars. So, which takes me nicely into what I call the winging it question, Zara. So this is a random
Oh.
question. Don't worry, it's not too it's not too off left field. But I've got this question. So you want to be an astronaut. So I want you to
hmm
imagine that you're going to be one of these astronauts going on this journey to Mars. Right. So this is your winging it
Right,
question.
right.
Are you ready?
Yeah.
Okay.
Go ahead.
So if NASA said, okay, we're sending you to Mars, Zara, but we can only give you one type of food to eat for that entire 6 month journey, what would be the
Oh,
worst possible food option that they could tell you you're
the
going to eat? The
worst.
worst possible food option.
Oh, oh, interesting. Oh, the worst would be. Oh, I feel like I'd have to think about this. I think, um, it would probably have to be something like, just a whole lot of like, what's it called?
You're probably going to say my favorite food, and I like
Um,
fried chicken or something like that.
Oh, yeah, no, it would probably be it would probably be mushrooms. Um,
My wife
I'm
hates
I
mushrooms. I love them.
I cannot do mushrooms. I'm afraid like I that's not I'm getting off the rocket at that point. At that point, it's like it's never mind. I don't
No
want to be
mushroom
an
soup, no
astronaut
mushroom
anymore.
risotto. I like them. In fact, I'm going to cook a spaghetti bolognese this evening, and I bought some mushrooms, but I was under strict instructions not to buy too many mushrooms. But I like them. What would be the nicest food? What would be the best food option you could be given?
The best. I'm a big fan of sushi.
I love
I'm a
sushi.
really big fan
Yeah,
of sushi. Yeah, sushi. Or like fried chicken in Korea. I had the most incredible Korean fried chicken.
yeah.
So I would have that any day.
Excellent. Good. Um, Zara, are there obviously a lot of people behind the scenes were helping you out with this? Or any particular sponsors of the around the world journey that you made, or any particular people that you'd like to give mention to?
Of course, yeah. I mean, my family was incredible. I had incredible supporters, both both working, to make this dream a reality, but also just supporting me, on Instagram, Facebook, in person. And then my sponsors were also, I couldn't have done it without them. Just just plain and simple. They really made this become real, and that was like so. ICD Soft is my main sponsor out of Bulgaria, and I remember I got that phone call kind of out of the blue from this guy. He was like, "Hey, I heard about what you're doing. I think it's really cool, and I want to become your main sponsor."
Wow.
And that's how how that came about. But yeah, no, just people were so kind and generous, and without the countless volunteers it wouldn't have happened. So I'm really grateful for that.
Fantastic. And also nice to make mention of the previous world record holder, female pilot world record holder. I'm probably going to get the pronunciation incorrect, so please correct me. Shasta Was, is that right?
Yeah, Shasta Wise, yeah.
Shasta Wise.
So
And yeah.
so Shasta was amazing. She actually mentored me as well,
Oh, wow.
to kind of help me out. But she, yeah, incredible.
Well, big thank you to her as well, and all the people I'm sure that have supported you. I've absolutely no doubt, Zara, that you're going to achieve whatever it is you set your mind to. As you said earlier, if you don't try and set your mind to it, you never achieve it. So, but actually, I think you're one of those people that's just going to forge that path, and hopefully, the next time I get to chat to you, it'll be maybe not on the spaceship, but maybe when you're back from the spaceship, we'll have a chat.
Fingers crossed.
Fingers crossed. Zara, listen, thank you so much for joining me today. Inspirational young woman, to lots of other young women in the world, but to me as well, and an incredible story. Go and check out Zara's book. I Flew Around the World as well, so we'll be I'm going to be digging into that. It only arrived in the post today, so I'm glad I got here on time so I could have it there. But thank you, Zara.
Yeah, thank you so much. And to anybody who's listening, I'm still looking for someone to beat my record. So please go do that, and then I will help you.
Good stuff. Thanks, Zara.